On this episode of This Week in Space, we are going to the moon with the Great Private Lunar Armada to see who's going to the moon, when they're going to get there, and when do we get to go.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 144, recorded on January 17th, 2025. The Great Lunar Armada. Hello and welcome to This Week in Space, the Great Lunar Armada edition. I am, of course, Rod Pyle, Editor-in-Chief of Mad Aster Magazine, and I'm joined, to my chagrin, by Tarek Malik.
Chagrin!
Editor-in-Chief at Space.com. Hello, sir.
Hello, Rod. Hello, Rod. Happy Friday. Happy podcast day.
This is actually the highlight of my week, I have to tell you.
Oh, I'm getting all warm and fuzzy inside. So
that's it?
Well, what? It's the highlight of my week too, Rod.
There you go. Very well said. I've had 3 people write me in the last month saying that clearly it was the highlight of your week, so I'm taking that as gospel. All right. Before we get cracking here, as always, I ask you to do us a solid. Make sure to like, subscribe, and do the other podcast things that will keep us feeling warm and loved and on the air. And also, Anthony, is the audience survey still going?
Yes, it is.
All right. That means it's time for you to take this last chance to take the 2025 Twit Audience Survey. This is an annual survey that helps Twit understand the audience that we're talking to so we can improve your listening experience, which, believe it or not, despite what you hear on this show, we worry about all the time. It only takes a few minutes. It's quick and easy. If you go to twit.tv/survey, you can take it. And please don't wait. Take it before it closes at the end of this month because it'll help make Twit even better. And that will make them come to us with torches and pitchforks and make us even better. Speaking of getting better, it's time for the space joke.
Hey, yeah.
From this week's Joke Armada, this week's groaner comes from Nate Tanner. Hey, Tarek.
Yes, Rod.
What did the gantry say to the SpaceX Starship booster as it took off?
What did it say?
Catch you later.
Very appropriate.
Did we use that one before?
I don't know.
Sounded familiar, but I really did like that one.
Hey, if we did, I like it. Thank you, Nate.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. That was definitely worth a revisit.
We should reserve the right to use it again, too. So
and that was a good one. Yeah, well, we'll probably end up cycling through all the good ones twice eventually. Yet, I've heard that some jokes want to expose themselves to a lunar vacuum when they hear our jokes. But you can help. Send your best, worst, or most different space joke to us at twit.tv. Now, let's do some headlines.
Headlines.
Boy.
Headline news.
I love it.
Thank you, Australian Alice. It's probably not hard for regular listeners to guess what our first headline would be. We had an explosive display with Starship's Test Flight 7 yesterday.
That's right.
And, it was halfway good. They caught the booster.
Yeah. This was I think all of our news stories this week are from space.com, but they were very widely covered by other folks. But just a day before our podcast recording, SpaceX launched their Starship Flight 7 test flight. So this is their 7th test flight. It's also the first flight of a brand new Starship vehicle. I don't think they're calling it V2, but they kind of had the pro and the con. They successfully caught the booster, again, this time with really awesome camera views of the booster coming down from the gantry arm itself, which was crazy. And that seemed to have go very, very well. But shortly after that, they lost contact with the ship itself. And so the ship, they think, had a fuel leak as of the initial, analysis from Elon Musk. And It started a fire that then blew up the vehicle. And we know it blew up because we've got video of the debris falling over Turks and do you say cacao? Is that how you pronounce it?
Caicos, I think.
Caicos? Yeah. And I actually got called by a news writer from there last night to ask
that video.
Holy I know, isn't it in this video that people are seeing on our video stream? It's like cell phone video of the rocket going up and then it just explodes. And then in another clip, you see just this huge, massive fiery debris. I mean, the Starship is like 120 feet tall. It's really big. And It's just all coming down over this like the kind of palm tree area, really, really tropical, really lush. Other videos I've seen are people where it's passing right over their house or over ships and boats that they're on. So there is an FAA investigation into this now, because this is different than the standing FAA license approval that for failures that they have, which means that, you know, there's no threat to loss, there's no threat to life, there's no threat to property. When you have debris passing over populated areas, there is that threat, I would assume. So we're gonna have to see how this investigation goes. But it was a brand new version of Starship, lots of different changes. More propellant, 25% more propellant, new flight computer, different flap design, a lot of new reentry heat tile technology. Somewhere, something caught fire, and they're gonna have to figure it out.
Well, so the specifics I read, at least these are the musings of Musk, was that the fuel leak was in the intertank area, so it would be between the methane and liquid oxygen tanks, and that they think it caught in there. So when asked what he would do, he said, we're going to put a sensor and a fire suppressant system in there, which I guess that'll work. You know, you'd think you could just expose it to the vacuum. But whatever the case, that's how he plans to deal with it. And there's been a certain amount of pushback from, you know, on social media about, oh, you know, Elon takes a giant step backwards, and look at New Glenn and how well that flew. It's like, that's true, but you know, this was as you point out, a brand new version of Starship. It's longer, it's got more fuel, it's more powerful, it's more capable, carry more payload, so on and so on. So, you know, it's basically a new rocket with new systems in it. It's not everything scales 1-to-1, right? So you have to give it a break here.
And I would just remind everyone, and this is a company that lost a NASA payload rocket, you know, and then 6 months later, you know, returned to flight. SpaceX has been building these ships at scale. It's not like they don't have another one like already complete and ready to come out to test again.
Or another 5.
Yeah, exactly. Or 5. So they are going to come back from this. I think that the big question now is how much of a hit will the FAA investigation into this, because of the reentry over clearly populated or near populated areas. Will that slow things down more than past failures, you know, have done? And we'll have to see, because that is like a really big concern that the FAA has had, since they are fairly close to a populated area where they launch from with the world's largest rocket, you know. And so we're gonna have to see how that all goes. But it's interesting you mentioned New Glenn, because I think that's next on our list of big stories. So
yeah, and I'll just say, you know, once they start launching from Kennedy, I think they can avoid populated areas going in an equatorial trajectory. It's that weird Texas launch site that sends them out, you know, over Florida, of course. Yeah. And then, you know, you have to make a decision. Do you go straight and go out through the Caribbean, where all the friendly countries are, or do you arc south and say, oh, that's Cuba, we don't care? Which would be mean, but you know, this is Mr. Musk. You never know what he's going to do or say.
I think rule number 1 is don't, you know, build your rocket so it doesn't blow up. And then you don't have to worry about a lot of that stuff, right? Because it'll get to space pretty easy. So I'm just,
I'm a bit cold-hearted.
I'm not trying to be mean. I mean, this is they iterate, right?
Yeah.
They revel in their failures so that they can learn. I mean, pretty soon there's going to be a supercut of all the Starship failures.
Yeah.
Elon will do.
And that's okay. Just don't do it over occupied areas where people get hurt. That's all we're asking, Mr. Musk. Because deep in his heart, I think he really does like humanity in some cold way. All right. Next up.
Watch yourself, Rod.
Next up.
We're going to get letters. So...
Hey, all PR is good PR. Next up is Blue Origin finally launches New Glenn. Let me just preface this by reminding our lovely listeners, it's been, as of this month, 25 years since Blue Origin started, even earlier than SpaceX by a couple of years. And this is a long time in coming. Clearly, what they've done is taken the more established legacy aerospace approach to get everything perfect before the launch. So they started working with their little tourist rocket, the New Shepard. That's flown 40 times? 48 times?
I think 20, right? They're not on 30s, are 20s?
They? Okay.
Yeah, they're in the 20s.
It's flown a bunch of times, and let them work out some of the concepts here. Different engine, different design, but it is flying a rocket, so you learn a lot from doing that. Well, and their first flight of this one was remarkable.
Yes, like 17 hours before SpaceX launched Starship. It was all on the same day. It was a really crazy day. But
and let me just add for SpaceX, that was right after they launched a Falcon 9 with the 2 lunar payloads that we're going to be talking about a little later.
That's right.
And other rocket activity this week. So they just, SpaceX just really knows how to roll in volume. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I would point out that Blue Origin hasn't been spending 25 years on like developing the New Glenn rocket. They announced New Glenn in like 2015, 2016, something like that. So it's been a good chunk of time. But the
same year Starship was announced, yes.
That's right. It was the same year Starship was announced, and it's a larger rocket. This is a new heavy lift rocket for Blue Origin that has a 7-meter diameter, so it's like 23 feet bigger than most everything else except for Starship that's out there right now. Starship's at 9 meters, I believe, and for all intents and purposes, aside from the fact that we got no views from the upper stage, the rocket got to orbit just fine on its debut flight. They did try to catch the booster. It's supposed to land on an offshore ship, just like SpaceX's rockets, but they had some sort of issue on the way down and they lost the booster. So that attempt failed. But that was kind of gravy, as all rocket landings are allegedly are for SpaceX too. They always say that that's not the core, but now they try to assure that it'll be successful before they launch, and they'll delay. So that'll be the end game to help cut costs for this new rocket. But this will be really interesting to see how the next flight goes, and if they're able to successfully land these huge rockets too. So, but big kudos, because it seems like it went completely fine all the way up with these brand new BE4 engines, the BE3U engines. There's 2 of them on the vacuum stage. Jeff Bezos tweeted out a picture of the Earth from the upper stage. Is pretty cool.
So interesting when you start looking at the numbers. So the BE4 is about 500,000 pounds of thrust, which is about a third of what the Saturn V's F1 engines were, depending on which version of those you're talking about, and about the same as a new generation Raptor. I think the Raptor is actually more like 550 or 570,000 pounds of thrust. And then you've got, of course, the rocket structure, which, because it's going to be reusable, has to be a little more substantial than an expendable rocket. And you have to, of course, have enough fuel to fly back. So it's interesting trying to compare the numbers between these rockets. You really can't, because Starship and New Glenn are so different. I do have a soft complaint, if I may, because we're media guys.
Yes.
And if you watch the first launch attempt, the commentary was so lightweight, and social media, and this is so cool, and Tiffany and Amber were going back and forth with their comments, and I realize I'm sounding like a grumpy old man, and I have to confess, again, going back to the Apollo era, which I do all too frequently, we had, before launch and right during launch, we had Jack King, who was the voice of launch control. And it was just telling us how it was. The arm is retracted. The crew says it feels good, doing the countdown, all engines running, all that stuff. I liked that. I did not like, wait. I did not like when NASA started doing these paragraph-long commercials every time something launched, saying a new dawn for heavy industry in orbit, or whatever it was. But now we've gone to this kind of third extreme, which is like the Rocket Wives of Orange County talking about, I think how cool the launch is.
I take your point.
Okay, I'll stop on that. But let me just add,
you're getting close to digging yourself into a hole.
Yeah, I know. All
right,
but let me just add. So that was one thing. Another thing was they kept cutting away to the rocket itself, and then the voice circuit went dead, and we just stared at it for 3 to 7 minutes at a time with no voiceover, which was weird. And then the real strange one for me, and they only did it on the first attempt, I don't think they did on the second, instead of doing a launch hold like we were used to with NASA and SpaceX or everybody else, the numbers would just suddenly punch up. So it's like T-5. No, wait, just kidding. T-25.
So I
Okay,
think
defend, my friend.
I'm not going to defend. I think there's a lot that Blue Origin can learn about running an orbital class launch webcast, right? Their Blue Origin New Shepard flights are very short, 10, 15 minutes. The webcast, from like the launch point of view, they don't have to be that involved. I think that you raise some really valid points from like the media and the public awareness side. In the first half an hour of the live stream, they kept talking about how it was launch day, launch night, and they did not give an actual launch time whatsoever. And or any other facts, really. Exactly. It was just about how exciting it was. And again, I think that it's because it's the first one. And so they really need to see like what's what. And so it was a lot of kind of commercial, stuff about how great Blue Origin is, but there wasn't all right, the rocket is on the pad. It's this tall. We're launching at this time. We're currently at T-months. Here's the background of the audio loop from Mission Control going in the background, which I think would be very helpful for a lot of that. They did have a separate clean audio feed that media could get, by asking, which would. But
the public wasn't hearing it.
But the public wasn't going to hear all of that, and I think that would have gone a long way to do it, because then you would know when they call a hold, when they would do this, and I think it's a little bit more dynamic that way. But it is a private company, and they might want to keep that kind of stuff internal, to their employees or whatnot. Maybe they want to make sure that maybe they do something that's really proprietary. But I take the point. And I think that it's beginner jitters, and maybe it'll get better as things wear on. So
okay, but can you really claim beginner jitters when they've done at least a couple of dozen flights of their tourist rocket, and and I've got issues with SpaceX's coverage as well, but at least I didn't see him the last time I watched, but they had that engineer on who, although he had kind of a funny voice for radio, he gave you the technical aspects of, okay, and here we're coming up on MECO, and that's when the main engine's cut off because we're worried about max Q and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he explained things, and they kind of did. I shouldn't completely shortchange Blue Origin. I mean, the host did kind of explain some of that, but the giddy factor just really caught me on the back foot. And the last complaint, the guy they had down with the crowd on the beach. I mean,
at Cars Park, it was at Cars Park, right?
Yeah, I was having like serious hipster overload there.
Cars Park is like a huge park near, like on Merritt Island on the way out to Cape Canaveral, whatever, where it's just a big public park. But I think that they rented that out or whatnot for their own big event, because you couldn't get there. The media site, we had a writer out there for the first attempt, and the media site was like 10 miles away at some hotel on the beach. I mean, you could get closer like on your own to try to get it. So I think there was a lot to be desired there that they're going to have to probably like look at. And I know that there's like our writer that was there mentioned that there was like no one there to talk to to let them know what was happening. And he was finding out about new launch times by our launch updates in our internal chat that we were following. So I hope it gets a bit smoother going forward, because eventually they'll be launching payloads for customers, not just Amazon. And they're hoping to launch a moon lander for NASA with this thing after like Artemis 4 or 5, something like that. And we'll have to see how it progresses. And I think that it will. But it's a valid point. I think that you should have more cameras on the upper stage of the vehicle that are public. There might have been tracking station concerns where they don't get all the signal down all the time, because it did sound as if the people in mission control and other people watching a different feed were able to see a lot of the events that we couldn't see in the public broadcast, but we weren't able to see them there. And I think that might have been some sort of tracking station like issue or whatnot, because they don't have Starlink. Maybe once they have their Kuiper belt thing, they'll have it. So.
We talked about this a little bit on Slack during the week, you and I, but I think it was Spaceflight Now. I get them and NASA Spaceflight mixed up, but I think it was Spaceflight Now that was given a very, what's the word? I don't want to say constrained, but a very objective blow by blow. Yeah, matter of fact.
Those guys are great.
Happening next. Yeah, and I thought, okay, that's how it's done. And these are people, they're entrepreneurs that are doing this. They're not funded by anybody except their viewers. So I was very, very impressed by that. We got to go to break in a second, but just to whine about this one more time. I know I've done it on the air before, but I was at a launch out at Vandenberg, out on this windswept rocky bluff in the freezing cold, waiting for a Falcon 9 to take off. And there was like nothing. It was just a dirt bluff. There was no speakers, no monitors, no countdown, no nothing. We're just sitting there, trying to listen we couldn't get cell signals. So, if you didn't have a radio station covering it, you were sort of done. So finally this beat up old Air Force truck shows up, and some young people in uniforms get out and they start laying out cable. I mean, it looked like something from World War II. They're rolling out cable and they bring out this big speaker on casters and stuff. So we finally are getting the voiceover, but it's the narrative, but it's like one channel from Mission Control that had like, valve updates every 2 minutes or something. So that wasn't helpful. So finally, the young lady who's the PR liaison gets out and starts giving a talk. So all the cameras swing that way. And as she's still talking, I hear this gasp and turn around and the rocket's taken off. And we all miss it because she was jabbering in the middle of it. And it's like, well, lesson learned. Don't let them handle it.
One thing that I would point out is that there is a trade-off when private companies are running their own launches. And technically they don't have to provide any of this stuff if it's not in their agreement.
True. They can push the go button.
Right. I am just grateful that we have these launch webcasts, whatever gripes we might have about, picture or whatever. Let's just make sure that we let everyone know we don't want them to stop. Right. So otherwise we won't ever know what's going on. So we'll have to see how that goes. Because that's what Virgin Galactic did. They stopped webcasting, and you just find out about it when they tweet about it. So
soon they may stop flying altogether, but we'll see. All right. We're going to go to a break, so everybody go in standby mode. We're on a launch hold for the next number of seconds.
I see what you did there, Rod.
You like that? Okay.
Very appreciated.
So India's doing it now, man. They've re-entered the competition.
Yeah. This will be really important for our talk about like the moon missions coming up. But this week, actually, India became the 4th country to successfully perform a docking in space, with their SpotX mission. SpotX is an acronym that is short for Space Docking Experiment, and this was their first attempt at an uncrewed automated docking system. So you've got a target vehicle, a chaser vehicle, and the chaser just over time approaches, gets closer, does an automated rendezvous. This is something that SpaceX does with their Dragon. It's what Russia does with Progress and Soyuz, and it's kind of the approach du jour for future missions. And for a country like India, this is going to be a key independent technology that they need for the future of their space ambitions. They want to build a astronaut space station around the moon. They want to do a sample return mission that we'll talk about later from the moon. And to do that, they need this technology. And there's a bit of a slow go a bit after launch because it was only supposed to take a few days before they did it. But they saw that they were seeing higher than anticipated movement rates after it finished its maneuvers. Like it would keep moving when they thought it would stop, and they had to study that for a little bit. But it seems like they got all of that dead to rights, and they were able to make this happen pretty smoothly. So that's really exciting. They will have more approaches and more tests over time, and they also have a whole separate free-flying science platform on their POEM-4 module that is testing robotic arm work, an inchworm like arm like on the International Space Station, a space debris capture arm, a lot of really crazy stuff that they're going to want to use on future missions.
So if they're interested in a lunar station, I can make them a great deal on a not yet used but slightly aging lunar gateway.
That's
what do you think? Should
That's
you just sell it? Because it doesn't appear to be going anywhere, and I can't believe it, assuming that the incoming administration gets its way with human space flight.
They won't want to wait.
That's going to go away
for Gateway before they go there. Yeah, we'll have to see.
No.
They've already sold services though for it. They've already bought services. SpaceX is building the cargo thing for that, and Northrop Grumman's building other parts. So that'll be interesting to see how those agreements go forward. So
I wonder how much they've spent on that, because we know how much they spent on SLS, but I haven't seen the expenditures on Gateway yet.
Yeah, I do not know. We'll have to figure that out. We should do another episode on Gateway, right?
There we go. Who are we going to get to come on and talk about that? We'll have to take somebody hostage.
But yeah,
all right.
Tip of the hat to India Space Research Organization.
Yeah.
Well done. Look forward to bigger and better things in the future.
Well, and their crewed flights are picking up pace.
Yeah, we should be getting hopefully a potential prototype of an astronaut vehicle launch by the end of the year. That's a goal with the first flight next year or so. So.
All right, and now coming down from the heights of new space to the misery of living on Earth, need to talk a little bit about the fires in LA, of course. We talked about this last week. Probably, I think the closest fire line got to me was about 5 miles, but unfortunately, a lot of people at JPL can't say the same. JPL emerged unscathed, except possibly for some smoke, some residual smoke damage. But the neighborhood around it's incalculable. So I drove up to that area. We're seeing an aerial on the video now from KBC News 7 chopper. I drove up to try and deliver some supplies to a friend of mine who stayed put and kept like a fool and was hosing down his roof. He did manage to save his house. Many in his neighborhood were not saved. But of course, then the water pressure went flat and it was just sheer luck that he didn't get taken away. Anyway, that whole area, I was trying to take some food and water up to him because they have no services at all and pass it over the barricades set up by the National Guard. And I expected them to be up in Altadena, but they were not. They were like 3 miles south of there. And that's how big an area they were afraid was going to burn. Mm-hmm. So at this point, it looks like it's somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 structures destroyed, most of which are single family homes. Most of those are turn of the century or early 20th century houses. It's a fairly old neighborhood. So besides the absolute staggering loss of that, we've got what effectively is the world's largest Superfund site because there's a ton of toxins there. There's asbestos, there's arsenic, there was a lithium battery storage yard that burned out. Mm-hmm. There's lead pipes. There's all this stuff. So just the air we're breathing is terrible. So it's just a big mess all the way around. But more to the point, Caltech and JPL set up a disaster relief fund, and we'll put the URL in the show notes because it's pretty long. But it's a reputable effort. And let me just look at the URL here. Come on up.
I would say
that should end with .gov, so you know that you're either got .gov or .edu. Let me look. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that the impact of the fires was very much felt where I was at the National Harbor meeting of the American Astronomical Society, because many of the scientists, of the engineers, of the researchers from the Southern California area were supposed to actually present, their career-defining research at this conference, and that is something that they build their whole work, their whole lives around, being able to present and show what they've done in their field as experts, as thought leaders, and there was a very noticeable absence because those people have been affected by the fire. They don't have homes to go to, or they're trying to just sort things out. It came up during the NASA town hall where they were talking about the Deep Space Network. We talked about that last week with Leonard. First time in 60 years that there's no one in mission control at JPL. They're doing it out of Monrovia, apparently a backup site right now, which they didn't have before. So it's just a tragedy across. Now, for the people that were affected by that hope to go to AAS, they at least gave them some refunds, and so they don't have to worry about that. NASA has relaxed their deadlines for funding research, so that's future career work that these people who have don't have homes or have lost everything, they want to ease the stress of that kind of professional deadline too. They're gonna give them some consideration for the future. So at least there's like small things that people were able to do to help the careers of these people that are imperiled by the fire. But this funding is this fundraiser is very helpful just to get them some basic things that they need for life.
And so to make sure you're on the right website for giving, the prefix section is giving.caltech.edu and then / areas to support relief and so forth. But just make sure you're on the caltech.edu server when you're doing that. so you're not given to the wrong folks. The one thing that really, and this isn't space news, but it's frustrating to me anyway, besides all the things that usually happen in this kind of a crisis, is the state came out and said, hey, we're not going to take, I guess it's county, we're not going to take full property tax from you if your house burned down.
Mm-hmm.
So the people went, oh, that's a relief. But then they continued to say, we'll remove the value of the structure and you just have to pay on the property. Well, in Southern California, your property value is about 80% of the value of the entire shebang. Yeah. So here are all these people that have had their entire lives taken from them in some cases, and who have to find another place to live in an already overheated market, and the prices are going up because people are gouging, even though it's not legal to do so. And they're still going to have to pay tax on the dirt and ashes where their house used to be, while FEMA comes in and tries to figure out, it's probably going to take between a year and 18 months to bulldoze and take all this stuff out. Mm-hmm. So to me, that just adds misery to tragedy, and I think it's really a shameful thing, but that's the county for you. All right. Anthony, do you want me to take a break before we move on? Yeah. Okay. So we'll be right back after this short break. Don't go anywhere because the excitement's about to begin. Stand by. The Great Moon Armada is embarking.
That's right. Again. Right.
Well,
we had that last year too. We had a fleet of them go out last year too, but now it's really going to happen. Now this is
fingers crossed. This is the age of commercial ventures, and I really, really, really would like to see a completely successful landing this year.
Yeah.
So we've got 2 tries going off. One from a private company and one from Japan that left last week or earlier this week. Excuse me.
On the same rocket. They left on the same rocket.
On the same Falcon 9. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, do we want to talk about like what actually happened and before we start putting it into context? I got there in the end. Woo! All right.
We could do that, or we could sort of give a background of how this commercial stuff kicked off.
Really quickly, the reason we're talking about the Lunar Armada is because this week SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket launched 2 private missions to the moon. One of them is Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost, which is supposed to arrive, I think, in March 2nd, if memory serves. And the other one is the Resilience lander by iSpace from Japan. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those 2 in a bit, but that's the background. That's why we want to talk about that, because they are not the only ones going to the moon this year, and not by a long shot. So, all right, where did these missions come from, Leonard? Leonard. Wow.
Here, let me put on my mountain man beard.
I mean Rod.
I'm sorry, what's that, Mortimer? Years back, Google in their vision, and I give them credit for this, set up the Google Lunar X Prize, where they were going to give, I think first it was 20, and then it expanded to $30 million to the first private entity that landed on the moon with hardware and was able to traverse 500 meters. And whether that was done on wheels or jets or whatever was up to you. Did it have to pick up a sample? I don't think so.
No, it was just you had
travel.
To move.
Yeah.
And you had to have pictures.
So, a lot of people jumped in on this from all over the world, and a lot of progress was made, but nobody actually got off the ground in time. And finally, Google ended the thing in, I think, 2019.
Yeah. They closed it. Nobody won. Nobody got the money.
And they got to save their $30 million. However, a number of other contenders continued and did manage. Some of them got money from their respective governments. Some just continued plodding away. A lot of them folded up shop and gave it up because there was no golden pot at the end of the rainbow. But that was the genesis of, was it one or both of the ones that went off this week? I don't think that's what started iSpace. Maybe it was, but certainly the other one was.
With the Firefly?
Yeah.
I thought iSpace was a a progenerate from there.
So they might have been. See, I get iSpace and S space mixed up. They're Chinese.
Yeah.
So definitely they weren't part of it. So I guess the Japanese one may have been.
Yeah, because I know that Space IL was, and that Astrobotic was a big contender for there. We'll talk about them in a little bit too.
Yeah.
And then Blue Ghost came as Firefly solidified their spacecraft approach beyond their rocket approach.
So as long as you brought it up, why don't we talk about those two missions? What are they going to do? And by the way, I just discovered yesterday, our friend of the show, Steve Jurvetson, actually has a payload on the Blue Ghost lander.
Oh, wow.
He made his own payload. I don't know how you do that, but he did it. So
which one do you want to start with first? Firefly or Blue Ghost? Blue Space Ghost. They should have called it Space Ghost, right? That'd be cool.
Take your pick.
Well, let's start with Firefly Aerospace just because it's called Firefly and Blue Ghost. I think that's a lot of fun. But this is, an evolution from that Google Lunar X Prize is the Lunar Commercial Payloads program that NASA runs. Their
CLIPS
commercial lunar payloads. Pardon me, their CLIPS program. And last year in 2024, we saw a few missions launch under that guise, and this is the first of this year to launch there. So Firefly has a contract with NASA to land a probe on the moon that has carrying a bunch of payloads for customers. Of them are a lot of NASA experiments as part of their Artemis program. So that's what's happening. This is the Blue Ghost Mission 1. Blue Ghost is the spacecraft, the lander that they've developed, and their mission for this one is called Ghost Riders in the Sky. Because I guess that's how we're naming missions now. I'm not against it, by the way. I think it's really great that people are getting them.
Yeah, why not?
But as Rod said, it's one of two missions that are on board, that were on board the Falcon 9 to launch, and this one it's going to measure solar wind particles in Earth's magnetic field. It's going to test radiation resistant computer hardware, use GPS systems for navigation around the moon, and then once it actually gets on the surface, it's going to study the regolith, the heat flow on the moon, electrical conductivity under the surface, things like that. So it's pretty slick, all of the things that they're going to do.
Excuse me, but if they're studying heat flow, that means they've got to make that drill work, right?
Yeah, that's
because we've been trying to study lunar heat flow since Apollo 15, I think.
Yeah. I mean, and they've got reflectors on there too. There's quite a bit on this mission, it seems like, and they're hoping that this is going to set the stage for it. They've got how many different experiments on board? I've got this big roundup that we have here, and it's a lot. it's too many for me to count right now.
Yeah.
And so this, the hope is that this is going to defy maybe some of the previous commercial attempts and actually land fully successfully. We talked about a couple of that in the past, and hopefully this will set the stage for what's coming up later this year. So resilience,
which is a lot.
Yeah. There's a lot. Resilience is a separate effort, though. They have some experiments on there, which I think NASA has one or two, if memory serves. Mm-hmm. But it's primarily like an iSpace full mission. And this one is really interesting because iSpace did try to fly to the moon with their Akuto R rover or platform before, and that one failed. And so this is kind of their return to it. So it's a landing platform, and then it has a little rover on it that's going to do things. They want to collect moon samples as well of the regolith, and I think they're developing a program like as NASA has asked for. NASA wants to buy lunar regolith samples of that. So I think that this sample collection is going to be part of testing the hardware to be able to eventually bring it back and then sell it to NASA or whoever wants to buy, I guess, some lunar regolith for science before instead of getting there. And then it has a little micro moon rover that's going to jump it's called Tenacious. That's going to drive around with a little shovel to collect those samples and then take pictures of them with its camera. So it's pretty cool. It's got a water experiment to see if it's feasible to make oxygen and hydrogen from lunar water resources. It's an algae food production module on it and other things. There's a plate, a commemorative plate. We too came here, from from Earth, and I think it has a charter of universal century from Gundam, right? Which is Japanese anime cartoon, which is going to.
And I think the Blue Ghost has a hopper, if I remember correctly.
It's possible. There's a lot on this,
which is interesting because I thought that a hopper would be nitrogen powered, but it's at least the one I read about is hydrazine. They're using nasty old hydrazine, which we've been using for no ignition required reaction rockets since before Mercury. I think the thrusters on some of those early moon probes are hydrazine. Not stuff you want to mess with. Very bad for you.
No.
But yeah, so they got at least one hopper going up too. Let's see. Let me look at the count here. I guess we should throw out another break because I want to come back and talk about the beginning of all this, because I think the first one was Beresheet, correct?
Yeah, Beresheet was the Space IL one. And,
so after the break.
I should point out there's a vacuum on Blue Ghost too. They're going to use compressed air to try to collect moon samples. I think that's going to be really fun to watch. It's called a lunar planet vac.
Is that direct deployment from the lander or on the rover?
It's on the lander. It's on the lander. Yeah. So
that'll be cool. All right, stand by. We'll be right back. So this Armada, the tip of the spear, as it were, was the Israeli company Space IL to send up Beresheet lander, the Beresheet lander, which was another Google Lunar X Prize venture in April 2019. And it was pretty simple. It was mainly a time capsule with a bunch of cultural stuff on it. Did have a magnetometer and a laser retroreflector because, I guess we need another retroreflector on the moon to see how far away it is. I mean, there's about 7 of them now. We know how far it is. But of course, the controversy was...
We know how far it is for now, right?
But the Apollo retroreflectors still work just fine, and they're like 2 feet by 2 feet instead of these little things 3 inches across, easier to hit. Anyway, but the controversy came up when it was made public that at the last minute they had included tardigrades. And I just read the other day, and of course the concern about tardigrades is they can sit there for we don't know how long, thousands of years anyway, in basically an inert freeze-dried state like brine shrimp that you feed your fish.
Don't you mean water monkeys?
Sea monkeys. Yeah. And then you add water a million years later and they kind of stretch and wake up and go, "Oh, what's up?" So there was concern about that, but they're encased in a block of lucite. So it's hard to imagine how that would happen, A. And B, of course, whenever we talk about planetary protection protocols, it's the moon. I have not yet talked to a scientist that has said anything other than don't worry about it, because it's in a pretty inert state. I mean, the best thing that ever happens on an afternoon on the moon is that it turns to night or vice versa, and you get micrometeoroid impacts and radiation, and that's kind of your day,
You seem team tardigrade, Rod, like as opposed to team preserve the moon. Is that the case?
No, I'm team let's get on with it and stop worrying quite so much about the
I don't know. In Apollo 18, they had those moon spiders, so which I find absolutely horrifying. But if true.
Yeah. That was a dumb movie.
Okay. I tried to like it. I highly disagree, but
yeah, but you probably liked Iron Sky too, right?
I thought Iron Sky was pretty funny. Yes.
So a friend of mine who I hired early on in my producing days at Disney Educational wrote that, and I suffered through it and wrote him a note saying, "Mike, what happened?" He said, "I lost control." I said, "You lost control of yourself?" He said, "No, I lost control of the script." And it just went, because as you saw, it goes in this wacko direction of what's her name from Alaska is now the president, and she's got this force of dirigibles that are going to go up and shoot down the Nazi planes coming from.
I think you're assuming that everyone knows what Iron Sky is.
Sorry,
I don't know if we want to really get into that.
It's not worth going into.
It is moon related, though. I mean,
it is.
So I could see how that could be part of it. They made a sequel to that too, by the way.
Yeah, which was no better than the first. Anyway, sorry. So Beresheet. So we've got tardigrades on the moon that we have to worry about coming to life and, growing 10 times their size. No, sorry, 1 million times their size because of lunar radiation and attacking the first settlers. But we'll worry about that when we get there.
That is the plot of Star Trek Discovery. They have a giant tardigrade that powers their warp core in that one. So
There you go. But mainly I bring it up because it was an offshoot of the Google Lunar X Prize. So that's as close as they came to succeeding. And that one unfortunately crashed. And
it did, but it was a really novel attempt. I mean, they were actually able to get off the ground and approach the moon before they had that failure. And that was, you're talking about private missions. They had their own big press conference ahead of the launch, fully independent, like having experts available. I remember that Hanukkah Weitering was writing for us at that time, and she went down there and covered the whole thing, soup to nuts, when they got off the ground. And so, at least they were able to make the attempt, and they were trying hopefully to come back from that. But they're not the only ones. They didn't stop there, so that's good.
Yeah, and then next we have Astrobotics Peregrine, which went up last year. Peregrine, and unfortunately suffered a propellant leak on the way. And I guess I'm trying to remember the details of that. These are a lot of the subsystems they're using are commercial buys, and I think that was one of the concerns about perhaps how that propellant leak started.
Yeah, man, you have to do mental gymnastics to try to remember as well. I think that this was really something that it was a new vehicle. They thought they had tested it all the way through. They got it up into space, and conditions were a little bit different. It gets all shaken around during launch, and things can happen. They had the thruster leak, and then they were able to control the vehicle because of it. And they were able to restore some control, but by that point they had used so much propellant that that they weren't going to be able to do have the finer control that they were going to need for the landing itself.
So to be good custodians of the cosmos, they let it come back to Earth and re-enter.
That's right. So it did decide to come back home and say, you know what? It's not worth it, this trip,
So then you already talked a bit about Intuitive Machines' IM-1 mission, which launched in February 2024. I
think you mentioned it earlier, yeah, because we talked a bit about how 2024 was like the first Vanguard. These were all CLIPS missions. These were the first ones to fly. And Intuitive Machines, I think also their Odysseus probe launched on a Falcon 9, correct? Right?
Yeah, I think so.
Everybody and
it's easy.
Apparently, as one does. And Intuitive Machines got farther than most, in terms of these commercial missions. Japan also had a separate mission too, for the Slim one, and that one has its own. But that was a JAXA mission. It wasn't a commercial mission. But Intuitive Machines got close. They were they landed a bit harder than they thought, and then the rover tipped over. So it was stuck in. Or the lander, pardon me. The lander tipped over, and this one was a little bit sad because I was just at AAS, and there was a radio telescope experiment on this one with 5 different antennas. On the way out there, they got stuck. They didn't roll enough, that barbecue roll, and apparently because it got so hot, one of their antennas just popped out on its own. And they were like, wow, that's interesting. We deployed early, and they were able to do extra science because of that. But they were able to get 5 minutes of data at least for that experiment from despite having this rover tipped on its side. There's a picture of it here. I keep saying rover, man. I think I really want
but it had
to see more rovers on the moon.
It had a mini rover. They just couldn't deploy it.
It did. It just couldn't because it was tipped over. They think one of the legs got caught on a rock, and it was one of the legs was sticking up because one of the photos showed the legs sticking up.
Did they actually quantify that? Because last time I looked at it, they were still kind of scratching their heads over exactly what happened. But when you look at, and I'm not an engineer, fully admit, but having looked at an awful lot of landers, both in photographs and in person, mostly NASA stuff, all robotic, I'll add, except for the LEM. Looking at the leg structure of the Intuitive Machines for that tall vertical body, it looked like Tinker Toys. They were so thin. I'm sure they're strong, but they weren't strong enough.
I think that was part of it, right? Because they landed harder than they thought. Then you have these legs that were built a bit spindly. Again, they were confident that this was going to work. So maybe one of them crumpled a bit, and then because it crumpled and the whole thing tips over, maybe it landed. It had a lot of stress on it, but it hit a rock because they were coming in a little bit sideways. That's very possible too. And then you pitch over a bit. They could see that the legs were sticking up. in the air. So they knew that it was on an angle. One of the 5 antennas of the experiment that I was in a session at AAS about was crushed because it was facing the ground now. And a few others did pop out, and they were able to get, like, as I mentioned, that 5 minutes of data from the moon. So
I hate to interrupt, but Anthony gave us both a little reminder in the Discord. Stay on target. So we have maybe 10 or 15 minutes left here, and we have to get to the topic at hand, which is what's coming up. So why don't we start off with you've talked about Blue Ghost a bit. Is there more to say about that?
Well, I think that this is going to be very interesting to see how Blue Ghost goes, because this is actually the first of what they hope are going to be a series of moon landers and other missions by Firefly, and I think I'm a little bit excited to see their sample collection stuff, like, because if they can demonstrate that they can successfully collect the lunar regolith with this vacuum thing, then that'll be another kind of economy, another kind of opportunity that they'll be able to open up going forward. So now it is going to try to catch Earth, the lunar dust too, that level, what Cernan talked about, that glow on the moon horizon. They're going to try to use a 360-degree camera to see that weird stuff too on the surface. But they only get 2 weeks there. It's a lunar day. That's the length of this mission. So we're going to have to hopefully see how long they're going to be able to last.
Yeah, just got to comment, we're still struggling, and I get that these are early efforts, but we're still struggling with something that can last lunar night when we had ALSEP experimental packages up there. Admittedly, they were deployed by astronauts in the 60s and 70s. But some of those ALSEP packages lasted, I think, 4 to 5 months, if not more, because they were powered by. Because then we would just throw plutonium chunks anywhere to power these things. It's unfortunate we don't have very much left. All right, and before we go to our last break, let's talk about whatever else you've got on iSpace. And just a quick history of them. They're part of a company called White Label Space, which I guess was originally out of the Netherlands. And again, this was founded to respond to the Google Lunar X Prize. But they closed out the Netherlands side, and the whole thing went over to Japan. So Hakuto R1 launched in 2022. And that was a soft crash you talked about. And then Hakuto R2, Resilience, just launched with Blue Ghost on January 15th. But that's going to take 5 months to get there.
Yeah,
a long, slow cruise.
Yeah, that one gets there later in the year. By the way, we didn't say it, but I think March 2nd is the targeted landing date for Blue Ghost.
March 2nd or 3rd.
Yeah. So, but this Resilience is what this one is called, this lander, and it's a bit more arty than Blue Ghost because it has
arty.
For example, we talked about the fact that it has a commemorative plate for the Gundam anime, right? It has from Bandai Namco Research Institute. So that
how could they bypass Godzilla-san for that?
Well, I mean, it's I think there's a moon base. There's a big base on the moon in that anime. I just started watching it, by the way. But they also have the rover is carrying this small red house framed all in white by Swedish artist Mikael Genberg. It's called the Moon House, and it's an art installation, and it's going to be riding a tiny rover that is about a foot. It's about a foot wide, 10 inches tall, and about 21 inches long. So it's about
2/3 the size of Pathfinder back.
Yeah,
in the 90s.
It's a or
and
like
this little house is like right down front, right?
Yeah, it's like right on top of it.
And, yeah, it's really wild.
And so it's going to be very interesting to see how all of that ties in to the science mission too, because you have this test to produce food from algae, to make air and stuff from water, and then you have this little rover that's going to drive around with its little camera to try to scoop up samples, and then you've got the house, you've got this commemorative plaque. So there's a bit more of a ethereal tie that I think is really fun for that mission itself. And then part of it is that they're also going to do a deep space radiation experiment to monitor radiation levels on the Earth to Moon trip, which is really valuable to know, both about the health of your spacecraft, which you have to safeguard them, as well as your astronauts themselves too.
So Anthony, do I have permission to go one more story before we break?
Sure.
A shrug's better than a thumbs down. Okay. So IM2, Intuitive Machines IM2, will be launched in February. And this one's exciting because they have I think, meter deep drill, a mass spectrometer, and they're aiming at Marsden Crater near the lunar South Pole, where a lot of these things intend to aim eventually. This is the one that has a gas-powered hopper, which carries a neutron spectrometer. So specifically, that can look for hydrogen signatures that may be indicative of water ice.
Yeah.
And excitingly, although the Chinese beat us to it, it also has a small lunar orbiter called Trailblazer to act, I think, as a relay, but also to search for water signatures on the surface. So this is kind of a whole bunch of things in one. This is kind of a potpourri project. And it's an interesting combination of Lockheed Martin and JPL putting this together. And so it's more of a government project than private industry, but because Intuitive Machines involved, it's kind of a conglomeration of all three. So it's still a CLIPS mission.
And that drill, that's the Prime 1 drill that NASA's really interested in, and they really want to see it. By the way, the Intuitive Machines landers are called Nova C. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So, but Nokia also has a 4G terminal. They want to test like moon cell service on that mission. That'll be pretty interesting to see how communications evolve on the moon as well, and that's a neat kind of thing to look at, I think, as well.
And finally, they have a Japanese mini rover called Yaoki, I think, if I'm pronouncing it right, and a device from MIT called MicroAnt. So let's go to our last break, and then we'll come back and wrap this up with all the other cool stuff that'll be happening later in 2025. Stay with us. Blue Moon Pathfinder Mark 1.
That's right.
Finally.
We were just talking about New Glenn and its success. And so kind of on the docket, and that's if they're going to progress, is their Mark 1 Pathfinder lander, which
Blue Origins.
This is Blue Origin, pardon me, which is supposed to be their big push to do moon services. And this is a big lander that can deliver up to like 3,000 pounds of stuff or mass to the moon.
It's bigger than everything we've talked about, but very small compared to what they're ultimately going to do, right?
Exactly.
About 10 times the capacity.
Exactly.
But this is kind of the proving ground for their lander contract, because they are getting NASA money to do this.
Yeah. And the goal is to see if this works. And then some of the other renderings of like future giant versions of the lander can like carry a rover on like a little hinge thing that'll be able to swivel it down after it gets down there. And of course, Blue Origin wants to build a crewed lander as well as a second option to Starship in the Artemis 4 or 5 timeframe. And they're working on that. And they would need this technology to be able to do it.
Yeah, and it's cool looking. It's kind of it kind of harkens back to the lunar module a bit, I guess, without the pressurized volume above. But I think what's interesting is, on the SpaceX side, so SpaceX and Blue Origin are the two contractors that NASA's made deals with to ultimately land Artemis crews on the moon. SpaceX is all in with the lunar version of their Starship. From Blue Origin, I think I've seen at least 3, maybe 4 different designs. Everything, the small one to the early Blue Moon, which sadly, I don't know if it was before or after their original unveiling, but you've seen the pictures. I think you ran them at space.com. It had that glorious big spherical fuel tank up front. Yeah. And then a few hours later, it was deflated and hanging there like a,
I saw it at the International Astronautical Congress way back when in 2019.
Oh, drop. Go ahead.
Yeah, they had a life size version there.
Yeah, but it wasn't deflated when you saw it, right?
It was not. No, it still looked cool.
Better when it was spherical. But I guess my point is, they seem to be looking at a variety of platforms and configurations to best suit the needs of that mission or that era of missions, which I think is very smart. It's still scratching my head over Lunar Starship, Yeah. Very tall, very tippy, on a very uncertain surface. And it's almost like you want to say, hey, Blue Origin, you go first and build a landing pad, and then we'll bring this thing down.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like 126 feet. I guess more, depending on what which version they're flying. Yeah, it depends on what version they're going to finally fly. Because Glenn Shotwell has said that it's going to get bigger, but but they're already testing the elevator that the astronauts are going to have to use to take down like the side of it. So that'll be interesting.
I grew up with the whole elevator out the side of the tall banana-shaped rocket thing in the 50s. And we all know you just throw out a rope with knots in it.
Right.
That's what astronauts climb down, because that's what they did.
I thought that there's just like a little hatch that's supposed to open up from the bottom of the rocket. Isn't that like the sci-fi thing?
Yeah, you just climb down a ladder next to all the fuel tanks.
Exactly.
Because the great thing about sci-fi rockets of those days was, 80% of it was crew capacity, and then they had these little fuel tanks in the back. And you're thinking, that would not even get you to Glendale. All right, so that will be flying. We're supposed to have a Starship human landing system lunar demo this year.
I don't know, man. I don't know,
because that is the one that would require many multiples of retankings, right?
Yeah, because to get to the moon, you need 15 plus, right? Flights, and you need to be able to refuel. Which
16 to 24 by latest estimates.
I like saying 15 just to be optimistic. But
okay.
I guess, yeah. But in order to, they only want to fly 25 times maybe this year, and they haven't done the refueling test yet. They haven't done any of that stuff. They haven't even flown in orbit yet. So I don't think we're going to see that this year. Is I think what I'm trying to say. So,
well, and I hope to good graces that the FAA does not decide to rewrite their license agreement for the year because of this failure.
Yeah, well, I think that what it says is that in the event of a failure with no impact on property or people or life, then they can keep flying. So this may be just a one-off and not for for every other thing. Maybe SpaceX, like you said earlier, changes what they fly over for the next flight as a way to avoid it. We'll have to see.
Let's find a way to launch over Russia. Astrobotic will soon be flying their Griffin, which is their next generation larger landing platform.
This is the one that was going to take Viper to the moon, and then it didn't. And I'm salty about it still.
Stab into my heart. Yeah. There's a lot of people that are salty about it. Should be.
Yeah. So, hopefully they'll be able to get off. They were looking for other payloads to get there. They're going to need that as well. And then they're going to have to see where they're going to be in the ride schedule for SpaceX for that.
Can I be childish for a moment? That's different.
Go ahead.
The delays on this lander are probably what cost us the Viper mission.
Yeah.
Now, I have since been informed off the record that there was not as much support for Viper at NASA as one might have thought, and that it was actually, it may very well actually have been a case of, oh, good, we can finally get rid of this thing, which I find very unfortunate, especially after spending $500 million on it. But at least ostensibly, the excuse that was given was, oh, well, the lander's not ready. Well, let's just cancel it. And of course, we all know they could have kept it. It would have cost money to keep it in mothballs and keep staff on for another year or so. But again, this happens a lot with NASA missions, and it's always a head scratcher. Compared to the loss of and waste of junking it, the continuation costs are minor. And it's kind of going to be, I think, the same discussion around SLS. It's not a good value to launch, but we got a couple of them in the making. And we've spent, I think, last I saw, $25 billion on that thing.
Yeah.
Over the last 20 years. So maybe you just use them for something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're there.
Or don't cut it for scrap, at least. At least find someone that wants it, So.
Hey, this podcast could buy it.
Well, yeah. Hey,
I've flown rockets. How hard could it be?
Donate to www.
No. Not in this climate. All right, China.
All right, yeah.
So of the Lunar Armada, China stands out as having really astonishing successes since 2007 with their first impactor.
Very steady.
They followed this, as they will do, they followed this tried and true model that the Soviet Union and the U.S. did in the 1950s and 60s, which is, look, let's just start by throwing a mass to the moon and see if we can hit it. So they did that in 2007. And then since then, they've had orbiters, landers, rovers, sample return, landing on the far side, co-orbited relay satellites, and a lot of other stuff that much of which we did and some of which we didn't. We never did a robotic sample return, we being the U.S., and we never managed to get relay satellites up because we never landed on the far side. So, kudos to them. I mean, they have stayed a course steady and true. And in the next couple of years, I think they're going to be setting up their first kind of little mini foundry operation, aren't they?
Yeah, they have, I believe, Chang'e 7 is coming up. That's the next one. And that's the one that's supposed to go to the South Pole of the moon. Then they're planning Chang'e 8, which is, I believe, a far side sample return mission, if memory serves. But each of them are carrying different technologies to bring, they're all based on this lander, rover, orbiter trio setup that they've really perfected with these latest series of missions, and then from that they're going to be able to do some ever more ambitious in situ resource discussions like you're talking about there. They want to look for water with the drill on, I think, Chang'e 7, and so it's going to be very interesting to see how that evolves.
Yeah, and ultimately, unless they've changed their plan the last year, the last report I read, this all is aimed towards eventually putting together the International Lunar Research Station, which they're doing at least nominally with Russia. If Russia actually contributes anything, which will at first be a robotic complex on the Lunar South Pole, and then eventually a crewed complex on the Lunar South Pole. So we'll see. I mean, that does bring us down to the next line, which is Russia still planning Luna 25. Oh, no, wait. Oh, Luna 25 was the one that they lost contact with, but did impact. And their budget now is so small. I think the last thing I read, it was down to something like the equivalent of $2 billion US. It had been at its height about 11.
Yeah.
And they're not building anything. They're talking about this flying more crewed missions, but a lot of what they talk about is either the production on it has been held up because of everything that's going on with Ukraine and so forth, or it's old hardware that has been sitting around, like how we started the space station. That main module was built in 1985 and not flown until almost 2000, or it's stuff that just exists on paper. But they haven't had a good record lately.
No, and they've tried to get to the moon. They tried to get to Mars as well. And
oh my God, how many times?
Yeah, and each time it's so I do hope that they will be able to get back into that flow, because you do want to see that science continue at least one way or another.
Out of Sync on Discord did mention that the failure of the SpaceX launch did disrupt a lot of commercial flights for that afternoon, which is
I'd
sort of forgotten about. Yeah,
I hadn't seen that. So
yeah,
again, I've been technically on vacation the last 2 days, so
you're always halfway on vacation. But somebody put up on social media, I can't remember where I saw it, but it was a map of how many flights diverted, and it was, because if you look at a flight map for a given day, there's lines covering the planet. You can barely even see the planet underneath, but there's this big eye-shaped diversion around this fallout zone.
Oh man, thank you, Out of Sync. That's very helpful to know. So.
Yeah, probably more than they needed to do, but always good to be safe. India, you already talked about.
Yeah,
but they have plans for robotic lunar sample return again. This is
2028. Yeah,
a country that's been making great strides. I think this year they're going to fly their Pathfinder crewed orbital flight.
Yeah, that's the plan, that they're going to launch an initial version of the module, and then. But the reason that we talked a little bit earlier about Chandrayaan in India for their moon mission is because this docking technology is vital for their moon sample return mission. They will need to launch a return capsule off the surface of the moon, dock it to a return vehicle, bring that back, and then undock it and toss it back. So it'll land where they want to go retrieve it. So very good to have that technology now under it. Now they can go focus on the other technologies that they're going to need for that mission, which are pretty substantial.
And do they have they published a big picture lunar vision like everybody else? Because they're not part of, they're part of Artemis, but I mean, do they have a separate?
So I do believe that the lunar exploration plan includes not just this Chandrayaan 4, but additional robotic missions, and then their space station and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I know I'm going to butcher it. But their space station, they want to build that around, like, in lunar orbit by 2040. So that's like a timeline that they're shooting towards with this assembly of a space station for astronauts to use to explore the moon.
And last but not least, Beresheet returns. We've got Beresheet 2 in the planning.
I put it here because we were talking about it earlier.
Yeah.
But maybe, as of 2023, it was facing funding concerns according to Space News, and so we're not sure like if it's actually going to happen or not. But there were science agreements at least in place about how to do the follow up. That they would do some experiments on it. But the last I heard, they're still trying to figure out how to get it funded. So
I think we ought to take up a collection dish.
For all of these, or for a TWIS moon mission.
Yeah. Right? Hey, if Steve Jurvetson could do it, why can't we? He only has $3 billion on us. How hard can that be? So, and we've left off some that were beyond 2025, and we did mention some that were beyond 2025. So this is a bit of a potpourri, but there just isn't time to discuss everything that's in the planning by all the companies that are doing so. And there's a lot of steps that need to be taken before most of these programs are really played out successfully. And that's all I've got. Do you have anything else, partner?
I just think it is like a really, really exciting time to be a space fan, because you have all of these different things happening all at the same time. And like, no matter where you look, we're going to get something new on the moon this year, one way or another. Right. And I just think it's really exciting, and they're all different ships and they're all different vehicles, and we're going to get new photos and all sorts of fun stuff. So,
well, and more subjectively, it's so thrilling again, because I watched the great slowdown after the end of the Apollo program. It is so thrilling. It's a very small thing in a way, but any given week, if I stay up to the right hour, I can watch a SpaceX rocket take off from Vandenberg, and that's just Vandenberg. That's maybe, I don't know, 40% of their launch activity, the rest happening at the Cape or at down in Texas. And that's astonishing. Because if it was back to the ULA days, we might see, well, especially now, 1 or 2 launches a year.
Yeah. Someone told me at AAS how much they really wanted to go see a rocket launch. I really wanted to see one. I just want to see one. I said, man, go to Florida any given week. You stay there more than 3 days, you're going to see at least 2 different SpaceX launches.
Well, if you time it right, you can see 2 in the same day like I did, which is pretty amazing. But, at this point, I have to admit, as thrilling as they are, it's like, oh, another Falcon 9 launch. I want to see a Falcon Heavy launch or a Starship launch or a New Glenn launch now.
Oh, that's funny. I've seen a Falcon 9 launch, a Starship launch, and a Falcon Heavy launch. Rod, I've got 3 out of 4. That ain't bad. So,
have I told you how much I hate you recently? All right,
we should go. We'll go for New Glenn. That'd be fun.
Okay, so you keep saying, Mr. Junket. Thanks everybody for joining us today for episode 144, the Great Lunar Armada. Tarek, where can we find you mooning these days?
Well, you can find me at space.com as always, on X at Tarek J Malik, also on the Blue Sky, and on Saturday. And I don't know if we're able to bring this link up. Anthony, I put it in the Slack chat, but on Saturday at 8:30 p.m., I will be giving a talk about these giant rockets for the Astronomical League of the Philippines. Alan Hale is going to talk about comets too, and that's totally free.
That's
if you want
Alan Hale of Hale Bop.
Yeah, that Alan Hale. That's right. If we keep scrolling down, you'll see him there too. So they're going to talk. He's going to talk about comets and other things to see in the sky this year. And I invite everyone to go ahead and come and talk about it, so we can talk about giant rockets. I dig it. I dig it.
You got your slide deck done yet?
No, I don't. I don't. I'm almost done. I got to the Vulcans now. I'm talking about Vulcan rockets, and then SLS, and I'll be done.
Oh, right. Talk about Vulcan rockets and not Vulcans. And of course, you can find me at pilebooks.com or at astromagazine.com. And please, in your copious spare time, when you're not listening to us, be sure to check out the National Space Society at nss.org. There, NSS guys, did you hear me say it? Go to the website, nss.org. And remember, you can always drop us a line at twist@twit.tv. We welcome your comments, suggestions, and ideas, and we do respond to all our emails eventually. New episodes of podcast published every Friday on your favorite podcatcher, so to make sure to subscribe, tell your friends, and give us reviews. We'll take whatever you got. And don't forget, of course, we're counting on you to join Club Twit in 2025. Besides supporting Twit in general, you'll help us stay on the air and forever bringing you great guests and horrid jokes, because everybody has to have a specialty, and that's mine. You can get the great programming with video streams on the Twit network ad-free if you're in Club Twit, as well as some extras that are only found there for
$7.99.
No, $7 a month.
$7. I spaced out there for a minute. Wow.
That's okay. I just want to see if you were awake. And we really appreciate it. And it helps keep the processors warm, the electrons flowing over here. And you've heard Leo talk about it enough, so I don't need to tell you all the things that he does so eloquently. But this is really a time of need. Advertising is falling. And unfortunately, they can't run this the way I run at Aster Magazine, which is definitely not at a profit. Finally, you can follow the Twit Tech Podcast Network at Twit on Twitter and on Facebook, and twit.tv on Instagram. So make sure to click that thumbs up and subscribe button wherever you happen to be. Thanks, guys. It's been a slice.
Yes, thank you. Also, happy birthday to my sister Yasmin. It was her birthday this week. But I'll call you later, too. I'm wearing a Vast t-shirt in her honor.
Do you think she's actually listens to this thing?
Well, we're going to find out, right?
Okay, I guess we will. There we go. All right, thanks, everybody. See you next week.